In this lesson, we'll take a look at using DynaMesh to really quickly create more complex objects in ZBrush. So one of the issues that we have with ZBrush when working with traditional geometry is the fact that we can get some stretching if we try to make some large-scale changes. So if I draw this sphere out onto the canvas, and we'll go to Edit Mode, make it a polymesh. So let's say now that we want to start to do some sculpting on this. So I'll go to Move. Maybe I want to start to pull out something like an arm or head. Well, I can pull this out, but you can see as I pull that geometry out, you can see where those polygons are stretching out. Okay. Now if I smooth it down, it's going to lose that shape that I'm trying to add. Now I can subdivide it, and that will subdivide those polygons, and I can kind of smooth that out, and I can pull those a little bit further. Okay. I subdivide again and start to pull those out, but the polygons are still stretching out here, okay? So what DynaMesh will do is allow us to interactively come in and remesh this object to account for changes that we've made to it. Okay, so let's start again with a sphere, and we're in Edit Mode. We'll make that a polymesh. So to activate DynaMesh, this is under the Geometry subpalette under DynaMesh. So you can see there's a button here, and there's a couple buttons on the side, and there's a resolution slider. I'm going to go ahead and set this resolution slider up a little bit, and let's just turn on DynaMesh. Now it's going to turn this on, and it's not going to really change anything yet, but let's see what happens here. So now when I kind of move this geometry out, okay, I can pull that out, and now what I can do is Control drag in the canvas, and that'll actually recalculate optimal geometry for the new changes that I've made. And so now it's actually added geometry in here and redistributed it around the model so that everything is nice and seamless. So I can come in here, and even using something like the snake hook brush, I can come in here and create some really crazy tendrils coming out. If I Control drag to remesh that, it's going to come in and allow me, I might have to smooth it out a little bit, but it's going to allow me to keep those polygons and kind of redistribute that versus having those all try to be stretched out. So enable you to create seamless meshes here with the changes that you're making. Same thing if you wanted to use maybe the clipping brushes. So you want to come in here and clip off the bottom, let's say. So we could clip that off, and it's really just smash that down. Then we could go ahead and remesh that to kind of create the optimized look for this. Now there's also, it will work in conjunction with the insert brushes, so many of those. So for instance, we have brushes that we allow us to insert different primitive shapes. So I've got an insert cylinder. So I can come in here, and if I draw this onto the surface, it's going to insert that cylinder there. So to make this part of a seamless mesh, I'd Control drag to unmask it, and then Control drag again to actually remesh it as part of this. Now, instead of being two separate objects, as you can see when I smooth this, it's actually a seamless part of that mesh. So this is also a really nice way to start to combine different shapes together to create this. And a lot of people would use this for concepting at the beginning. You're not going to want to get, you're not going to have your subdivision levels, and you're not going to want to get maybe too detailed, but it's really great for working out different parts of your mesh. Okay. So I could come in here and add another cylinder. If I wanted to, I could move this around before meshing. I could scale it. Okay, so there's a lot of things that we can do here, and then we can go back in and remesh it, or remesh that together. Now you do also have the ability to keep things separate. That's what this groups will do, and they'll actually allow you to kind of cut things apart. So for instance, if I wanted to kind of slice across this, let's turn on our polyframe, I could get the slice curve. So we'll select slice curve, and we'll come in here, and you can see that that actually has cut across that and created a new polygroup. So with this groups function on, if I now remesh this, it's going to actually cut apart these two pieces. So if I turn off polyframe and go to move, I can actually move that piece apart. Okay, and then if I wanted to move it back together, move it in a little bit, I could Control drag to remesh that. Okay, and now I've moved that in, and that's a seamless part of the model. I if you smooth it out, you can see where that's connected. So you can really create some interesting shapes here just by cutting things apart and putting them back together again. You also have the ability to turn on polish, and then you can reproject the detail that you've created. So if you've done some sculpting, it'll reproject that back in. So again, if I want to kind of cut off this part, remesh it, do a remesh, and then I can move it. I can click on this, move it around, remesh it back into the surface, and then you can see well, that's now a sort of seamless look to it. And you can change the resolution as well. There's also insert curve brushes that you can use if you wanted to mesh those together. So this would allow us to kind of draw curves onto our surface. Control drag again, and then I can kind of, just to visualize that, I can smooth it down. And you can see here that because we have the groups on, if I go ahead and turn the groups off, I can make that a seamless look. So you have the option to do both. And again, you can make that into one seamless mesh. And another cool thing that you can do here is go ahead and get another sphere here. And let's go ahead and make this a poly mesh. And let's turn this into a DynaMesh. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to increase the resolution a little bit. And turn on polish. Let's turn on DynaMesh. Okay, and so here what I want to do is go ahead and I'll insert a cylinder, kind of just like that, and then I want to actually create a shell. So instead of adding this to it, I want to actually create a shell. So let me clear it first, and then I'll create shell. And this is actually telling us I need to create a submask, which I didn't do. So let's look at that. Let me undo this for a second. So the mask, or the insert cylinder that I added, because I didn't hit the right key, it was not going to subtract it, which is what we want to do. So when you draw that out, you want to hold down Alt, and that will create a subtractive mesh. So if I were to just remesh this as is, it's going to actually cut that out, which I failed to mention earlier. So instead of adding it, it actually cut it out, which is really cool. So if instead of just cutting it out, we now want to create a shell, we can clear our mask and then create shell. And instead of just subtracting this the way it was, it'll actually cut the hole out and create a hollow shell in here. So you can see that it actually has some thickness based on this thickness slider, and you've got a nice hollow shell for your sphere, which be useful for many reasons. Okay, so when you hit Alt, that's going to create a subtractive mesh from your DynaMesh, and when you just draw it out normally, that's going to be an additive. Okay, so keep that in mind, and then you can also use this to create a shell with the hole based on whatever subtractive mesh that you've created. All right, so we'll use this more as we get into working on the actual worm character, but I just wanted to kind of show you the basics of working with DynaMesh. When you're done with it, you can go ahead and just turn it off, and you get a similar look as far as the polygons go. You get a similar look here where you've got a very high-res mesh, which is what it uses to create the detail that you see. And so again, there are methods to kind of rebuilding that as a lower res mesh, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So let's look at using DynaMesh very quickly. There's a lot of insert brushes that you can play with to incorporate into your DynaMesh, and keep in mind that if you cut things apart, you want to have this groups button on if you want to separate those and be able to move them around and reattach them in different ways. Okay, Control drag once to clear the mask, Control drag again in the canvas to remesh it into its new form, cleaning things up a little bit. So we kind of touched on the insert mesh brushes. So let's take a look in the next lesson at actually some other insert brushes and how we can actually create our own custom insert mesh brush. So we'll take a look at that next.